Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
With e-commerce off the charts, many small and growing warehouses are asking, how can I get ahead when my warehouse is barely keeping up? The answer is future-ready warehouse tech from Zebra Technologies. Warehouses can simplify and upgrade all processes, from automated inventory management to hands-free picking, with Zebra's tailored, scalable mobile solutions. They're simple and intuitive. There's never been a better time to upgrade for success with Zebra. How can your warehouse get ahead? The answer's in black and white. Get the answers at zebra.com/theanswer. That's zebra.com/theanswer. Fulfillment demand continues to skyrocket and outpace available labor. To keep up, warehouse operators are turning to flexible fulfillment solutions like 6 River Systems. Utilizing 6 River Systems' award-winning combination of collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, and operational expertise will make your associates and wall-to-wall fulfillment workflow more efficient. No new infrastructure, no change to warehouse layout, easy to deploy and scale, easy to train and retain associates, all at half the cost of traditional automation. Want to take your fulfillment operation to the next level? Go to www.6river.com to learn more. That's www.6river.com to learn more.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I am going to be joined by Nate Schisler, and he is the co-founder at DistributionX, which is a small consulting company that he just recently co-founded with his wife, actually, partner in life and partner in business as well now. So really cool stuff, and we're going to talk to him actually about his experience. He's a professional in the distribution logistics space, and he's worked for some pretty big names out there, and recently coming off of a job at Lululemon, and now transitioning into something else, doing DistributionX, and something else in the future as well as that, which we'll talk about on another episode in the future as well. That's a little teaser there. So we're going to talk to Nate about his experiences and some of the things he's been through in his career, and also, hopefully get some tips from him and some takeaways on, really how to improve your distribution framework and distribution setup and network overall as well. So Nate, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, and excited to be here.
Definitely happy to have you. Definitely happy we were able to connect through LinkedIn as well. You have a lot of experience in the industry, and I also work in the industry as well. So it's cool to be talking to like-minded individual and just be connected to each other in general. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how that's kind of led up to where you're at right now in terms of starting this DistributionX, which as we were recording this, you just kind of announced, I guess a week ago or something, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I don't. Thanks. I don't know what a traditional path into logistics and distribution is. I would call mine non-traditional, but I don't actually know what traditional is. For me, my story started out in the Midwest. I grew up in small town, Southeast Ohio. I was going down a path centered around math and science. I still refer to my wife as, I tell her I was a triple threat nerd growing up. I band, choir, and science fair. I was embarked on a path that was leading me towards engineering, and I had what's probably bit of a stereotypical kind of college epiphany experience where I realized that just because I was good at something didn't necessarily mean that's what I should be doing with, the rest of my life. And I've come to recognize that word should as a pretty dangerous one from a personal standpoint. But, at the time I was taking a full complement of like calculus and physics classes and I was, academically successful, but personally found that work, it wasn't really, ringing my bell, so to speak. And at the same time, I was also taking an ecom class, and it was a class that had a reputation as, like like drudgery, one of the things you have to do to get a degree. And I really enjoyed it. And that's kind of what that, clicked that moment in my head of like saying, okay, I've got this skill set that I possess, but yet it's not really like satisfying me at a personal level. Maybe I should pursue something else.
Okay.
And so I went down the path of getting a business degree. I've got a degree in finance with a minor in psychology just because. And then I had what I would consider to be a pretty typical, I guess, American young 20-year-old experience where I needed to find a job to get off my parents' insurance. I was 23 years old and I couldn't be on my parents' insurance anymore. And this is like, you talk about the American story. This is part of the American story is that at least at that time, if you were 23, you needed to get your insurance. And the closest game in town that could do that while I could still finish up at university was UPS. And so as I'm finishing a double major in finance and business law, I'm loading trucks at night for UPS. And I quickly, this is how things go. It kind of snowballed, quickly moved into management. I spent almost 4 years at United Parcel Service in a variety of roles. Everything from, like logistics planning to like operations oversight and management, overseeing a center of drivers, which was a really interesting experience. And I equate that time at UPS I often equate it to like being in the military and learning how to work in leadership with like a military training. I have a lot of military veterans in my family, but also just from like a stereotype standpoint, it's a very structured and rigorous environment. Large organization, from a management perspective, you're operating in a union facility, which has its own set of complexities and challenges.
Oh yeah.
And I learned how to be. I acquired a new skill set, and that skill set was performance management and understanding how to effectively manage, people and teams in kind of high volume, high pressure environments. I also learned some other cool things. I spent a year on the industrial engineering team, learned how to be an industrial engineer, via the UPS School of Hard Knocks. And so, after 4 years, felt like it was time for a change. And it was kind of well known in our part of the world that, so growing up in Southeast Ohio and being near Columbus is, is really a distribution hub for the Midwest, that kind of
big hub,
that kind of beltway from like Columbus to Kentucky to Tennessee. It was just kind of known in the industry that distribution centers liked to hire ex-UPSers. And so I started looking for jobs in distribution, knowing nothing really about what that meant other than it had to be similar to what I was doing because it was a lot of people in a large concrete building. That was like pretty much all I knew about what it meant to be in a distribution center at the time. And started working for Eddie Bauer. They had a large facility in Groveport. And during my last interview, and this will probably, looking back on this now, something I still laugh about, but during the last interview, they said, "We want you to be our WMS super user." And I said, I don't really know what that means, but the title's cool, so I'm in. And 15 years later, I've built an entire career around that concept, and and what I came to learn was that, they were embarking on a WMS implementation. Eddie Bauer's been, a successful catalog and then transitioned to e-com brand for a long time. They had a legacy system that was, believe it or not, this was in 2006, I guess. Legacy system that was still using dot matrix printers and, paper picking and super, super old school technology.
I'm cringing.
And they were putting in Manhattan I-Series.
Okay.
And, I didn't know it when I was interviewing at the time, but they were bringing me in to really become the first operations leader to learn the system at an intimate level. And so I was sitting side by side with the development team and the testing team and learning the application. And my job was going to be to basically migrate through the building and teach each of the, picking, packing, shipping on the e-com side of the business, how to use the new system. And we were going to do this on like a 90-day cycle. So that, kind of happenstance really started what I'd consider to be, my formal career in distribution. They were then acquired by private equity firm. We brought in some 3PL clients into the facility in Columbus, which was a really interesting experience. So at one point we had 6 brands under one roof. I then had the opportunity to go work for DHL Supply Chain, opening a 3PL site for a brand called Jim Marie, kids clothing brand.
Okay.
And then I heard about this Canadian company that was opening a DC down the street called lululemon. I first had to learn how to say the name. And once I got that sorted out, I had to learn what they were about. Oh yeah, they sell yoga pants. Okay, I'm not the target customer, but they're opening a DC. And I came to learn that they were not only opening a DC, but embarking on a multi-year retrofit project, implementing Manhattan open systems in their network. And so I left DHL Supply Chain and went across the street, literally, to Lululemon. Helped get that DC up and running, and then I, traveled the country for them for a few years following. So moving to the Washington area to do a WMS implementation of their DC out there. Okay. Also leading the project of their Canadian DC up here in Vancouver, where I reside currently. And then overseeing the WMS conversion at their Melbourne, Australia facility. Oh, nice. So in really like a 7 or 8 year time frame, I was a part of 7 or 8 WMS implementations, just kind of back to back every 12 to 18 months.
Wow.
And I really I feel super fortunate to have had that experience. For a lot of people, going through that once is, that's something you do once in a career.
Yeah. That's a big time thing.
And to have the opportunity, and to have the opportunity to participate in that process multiple times, multiple times within the same organization is something I feel very fortunate about. What I learned through that is that, speaking for myself personally, and I think this is probably another, I'm jumping ahead a bit to one of the questions that you'd sent out ahead of the show, but I like the scrappy startup environment. It's not for everybody. I like the fast pace. I like the kind of in the moment problem solving, decision making that's required.
Yeah.
But one of the other things I realized was that, there's, and this is something that's kind of a derivative of my decision to leave Lululemon and really start something new, is that, going through those types of projects at large organizations, I worked with a lot of external consultants, management consultants, supply chain consultants. Okay. And I'll tread lightly here because some of those are folks that you've had on the show, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for everyone that I've had a chance to work with. But the reason I believe small to medium-sized businesses typically don't engage management consultants and consulting firms in general is because it's, a lot of people say it's just too expensive. Well, when you really unpack what does too expensive mean, right, what it means is that if you're operating a consulting firm, that's your full time. You've got a bench of highly competent consultants. You've got to keep them engaged for long periods of time for that business to be viable.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens, at least in my own experience, has been if you bring in a management consultant for a very specific scope of work, they really want to start digging into other parts of the business, kind of finding it's packaged a bit as like, well, here's some other values that we can offer, but it's really a strategy to try and find more work, and maybe that's a good thing if you're a large, publicly traded company with deep pockets.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a small e-commerce brand doing $10-20 million a year, you can't afford to to continue to engage someone like that on a long-term basis. You need to be able to bring someone in who can efficiently help you solve your problem and then get into the work of addressing whatever the opportunity is. And as I started to present myself to the marketplace, looking for what's next, I kept getting that feedback of like, yeah, we'd love to hire someone like you, but we can't afford to keep you on full time.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider doing something for us for 2 weeks? Would you consider working for us for a month? Would you consider flying out to our DC and just giving it a 2-day walkthrough and letting us know, what you think based on your experience? And the answer is yes. I can and would like to do that, and that is kind of the basis for what DistributionX is. It's an experiment in a new type of supply chain consulting. Looking for short engagement advisory opportunities targeted towards small and medium-sized businesses.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, interesting. Yeah, really, really great background, and I love that you mentioned there something that's similar to my experience as well. Is that you mentioned that you only typically maybe experience one system upgrade or transition in your career, and you've experienced several. And I've been through the same type of thing, doing a couple different upgrades and also switches of systems and moves of warehouses and things of that nature, and you learn so much through doing those different types of things. And I think we're of the similar mindset of I like to be on the projects because it's always something different and there's problem solving. It's not so boring. But I want to take it back a little bit, because you talked about, and I know I have some listeners that are students that I mentor, and I'm curious, you said you weren't quite sure what you wanted to do. It sounded like from school, and you took this job at UPS at nights, as you mentioned, just unloading trucks. And I'm curious at what point did you really decide that this is the career path that you want to take? Like when UPS, I guess the slogan is "We Heart Logistics," right? So when was it that you decided that you hearted logistics, right?
Yeah, I mean, full transparency there. I moved from an hourly position to a management position pretty quickly, and that came via a connection that I had at the place where I was working. So I started working at our local UPS hub just as an hourly person, with the objective to try and get my own insurance. Turned out that a classmate of mine from Ohio University was a part-time supervisor there. He saw my name, said, "Why, this guy could be a supervisor. Why is he loading trucks? Let's make contact with him." And so that stuff kind of happened. I would describe that as like my introduction to logistics from, that's just really from happenstance. That wasn't, at that point, I wasn't really in from a career perspective. I think what really opened my eyes to the world of logistics, distribution, and kind of the juxtaposition of people and process and systems was when our particular delivery center was one of the smaller ones in the state of Ohio, and it was the last one to get what's called the PAS system, PAS, or preload assist.
Okay.
And if you've ever gotten a box from UPS, you'll notice there's a small 2x3 label on that box. It's called a PAL label, preload assist label. Everything has an acronym at UPS, and that little label is a mechanism. It's a system output that tells the person loading the driver's truck what truck to put it on and where to put it in their truck, which is a really fascinating thing to think about. And it was especially fascinating for me because at the time when I started at UPS at this particular location, we were still loading on our preload by hand or loading via load charts. And so you had boxes coming down a belt, and you had two guys at the head of that belt, and they were literally looking at every single shipping label and sorting boxes based on address, like their own knowledge of address.
Wow.
And then you were doing a finer and finer sort as the boxes went down the belt. And all of that was based on the preloader's inherent understanding of driver's route, of addresses, what zip codes they had, what zip codes they didn't have. Oh, this is a high volume customer. Oh, it's Thursday. This customer gets a bulk delivery on Thursdays. All of that kind of intricate tribal knowledge was lived within the person. And it was a very high skill job. And the preload assist system was designed to capture that knowledge acquired from the driver and their expertise on the route and from the preloader, and capture all of those variables in one system that would then output a result in the form of this 2x3 label that really someone with a lot less experience could come in. If a preloader was sick, for example, you could bring someone in to backfill them, and they just had to be able to read the label and know what truck to put it on and where to put it on the truck just by reading the label. And so the process for that implementation, as you can imagine, involved a huge data export from the United States Postal Service, every single zip code, street, address range, house number range in the counties that we serviced. But then the second phase of that was sitting down with the driver and mapping out their route so they could run it in a repeatable fashion every way, and just lots of really interesting, it's really business analysis, really the BA work of sitting with the consumer or the customer, in this case being the driver, and teasing out from them the requirements to have the system capture all of the subtleties of their workday in an electronic database.
Right.
And at that point, that's when I really got excited about what I think about that work, less about logistics, and that to me really like embodies what distribution is at its essence. It's this kind of trifecta of person, process, and system, and getting those things to work together in a collaborative way.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that was the point at which I was hooked on, maybe not distribution, but hooked on that space, being in that space of straddling people, process, and systems, and learning to speak those languages. And I really do view them as discrete languages.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, it's really cool how you mentioned, first off, it's really interesting to know, all that tribal knowledge that were in these workers' heads, right? And you said something interesting there about, if someone was sick, and now with the switch to the PAL label is, now somebody could easily fill in. But I'm sure at the time with all that tribal knowledge, it was difficult if someone was sick or someone wanted to go on vacation or something to fill in that spot. So I like how, you talked about the actual improvement there, and you could see, I'm sure, almost right away the benefits of that improvement, which kind of sounds like hooked you in, and being able to show the benefits to the workers as well. So that's a really cool story, and I like that. And I think those types of improvements, like you said, is kind of the essence of distribution. Distribution isn't necessarily just getting the box out the door. It's how do we get the box out the door in a better way, in multiple facets. So,
Yep.
so really cool story there. And I'm interested because you worked at UPS, and you even mentioned yourself. UPS is very very regimented, and you likened it to being in the military, right? So very structured as well. Obviously, with the size they are, and the established presence they have. And you also worked for DHL as well, which I've had the chance to work with before. From a customer perspective, they were our 3PL for a company that I worked for.
Yep.
And they're also, I would say, very, very regimented too, and they have a process for everything, which is the way it should be. But I'm curious, working at that type of environment and those large, focused on logistics and distribution companies, and learning to do things their way, and I guess getting the knowledge of how they set things up. How did that help you in your other experiences with Eddie Bauer and Lululemon? How were you able to take away the knowledge and, I guess, the experience of seeing things being regimented, and then take that into those positions and being able to kind of implement some of that same thinking and ideology?
Yeah, great question. When I think about the work experiences I had at UPS, and then again at DHL Supply Chain, I was at UPS for much longer. There were definitely times where I was in a role that was, just kind of a wheel in the cog. And so part of that large kind of day-to-day business operations. But then there was also times that, for example, with the preload assist implementation, the PASS system, where I was working on a very small project team, and that very small project team was operating in a very agile method. Things I took away from UPS, really, I think two concepts that have served me well over the years. One of them is a memory I have from my first day of management training when I started up at the Columbus hub, and we were getting a tour of the facility by the facility director, and he took us out in the parking lot, and there's a bunch of us, like, ambitious 20-year-old college grads, like we have no idea what's going on, and he takes out in the parking lot, turns us around, and he looks at the building, and he says, okay, so you look at the building, what do you see? And everyone's giving these answers of like, oh, it's a complex sorting facility, blah blah blah, like, getting these really like kind of detailed, like let's impress the director of the facility type answers. And we all got our say at what we thought the building was, and he said, look guys, like, boxes go in that side and boxes come out that side. Don't forget that. Don't forget that is what we're doing here. And it's really the essence of like keeping things simple, remembering what it is you're doing. Your job is to get boxes from that side of the building to that side of the building as quickly and efficiently and accurately as possible. The rest of the stuff, everything that happens in between is meant to be a value-added process. And if it's not adding value, then let's get rid of it. And if we can do it better, let's do it better. The other thing I took away from my time at UPS was recognizing that, and I think this is part of what keeps me interested and engaged and excited about distribution, is as fancy as the technology gets, I know one of the show sponsors, Six River Systems, like they make some really cool products. Like we're all talking about robotics now. We're all talking about vision picking and RFID and ASRS and all these great technologies. At the end of the day, there is a human component to distribution, and that I think will never go away. And remembering that human doing the work is also one of the customers of your project, and maybe one of the most important customers. Right. That mindset has served me very well over the years. I mean, when I think back to going through driver training at UPS and the 340 methods and all the intricate methods that a UPS driver is trained to perform, everything down to the level of, how you hold your key in your hand and like starting the engine at the same time as this is kind of that industrial engineering component of all those work methods of how you start the engine and release the parking brake and all of these subtle things that contribute to a driver being optimally efficient, those human ergonomic methods. Right. The point of learning all that is that you have to remember that at the end of the day, the person performing the work is a human being. And you can't design a solution or a system or a process that isn't friendly to that person. And in some cases, it has to be friendly to a very challenging population. And distribution centers experience this, pretty acutely during peak season. When we're bringing in, large numbers of seasonal temporary associates, often with agency support. How do you that are easy to ramp up from a headcount perspective? You can design the best kind of whiz-bang solution you can come up with, but if it's not easy to explain to someone who's only going to be with you for a few weeks and is maybe less motivated than your core staff, then it's probably not a good process, and you should challenge yourself to simplify it. So those are two things I took away really more from my time at UPS. The project at DHL was really exciting. I wasn't really exposed to kind of the broader rigor of DHL as an organization. I did work very closely with, they have their own kind of fleet of project managers and a very robust PMO process. And, that was something that I had not worked with or around before. We had always, at Eddie Bauer, we had kind of done that work internally, but, the value of good project managers, absolutely. Probably one of the best project managers I work with in my career was during my time at DHL. So, I'd say those are the three things I took away from that time.
I want to take a quick break to tell you about Variable and the new solution for on-demand labor. With demand always changing, why is your headcount always staying the same? If you're bottlenecked and overpaying for labor, your business can't keep up, much less scale. You can change that starting right now with Variable's on-demand labor platform. Post your work today and have bids from workers within hours. You'll be breezing through your backlog in no time with the help of the performance-rated workers you select. There's no volume commitments or term agreements, and you pay only for what you use. Post your first opportunity today at variableops.com/thenewwarehouse. That's VERYABLEOPS.com/thenewwarehouse. Now back to the show. Yeah, you said something really interesting there about, the customer also being, I guess essentially you said there, there's a customer of the project, and that's the employee that's going to be doing the work, right? To essentially support that process that you're implementing or altering in some way. So, as a business, oftentimes you focus on the voice of the customer, meaning the person that's purchasing your end product or your service, whatever the case may be, depending on your business. How often would you say, and how much of a factor would you say the voice of the customer in your scenario, being the employee doing the process, has played a role in making sure that your project is successful and also is implemented, I guess more smoothly?
Yeah, this is going to sound like blasphemy, I think, to many of my peers in the industry, but I would argue that from the perspective of a distribution project, the the success is more, or failure of that project is more impacted by the end user than any other single factor in that project.
Right.
Time, cost, scope. You know, when you think about we'll go back to like the project manager's toolkit. When you think about the project manager's triangle, you've got time, cost, scope. Everyone always talks about those three: time, cost, scope. And then in the middle, you've got these two other things that people sometimes talk about, but not often enough, I think. And that is conformity to requirements. So does the project conform to, does it meet the requirements that we set at the beginning of the project? And is it fit for use? And fit for use is the one that I think is the most underrated component of project success. Okay. You know, conform to requirements is really about, the art of business analysis. Mm-hmm. I've had the privilege to work with a really incredible, now close friend of mine who's a BA by trade, and you know, he really helped me to see business analysis as an art form and less of a science. But beyond that, it's that fit for use component, and fit for use is one that's kind of hard to wrap your head around, and it's not taught very well in the academic approach to project management. But fit for use is about that guy or gal coming in, you know, off the street making 10, 12, 15 bucks an hour, and their ability to learn the process and adapt to it. And I can say, I think in 100% of cases, if a project was successful or not successful, the biggest factor was the adoption of that process by the people who were actually having to execute it. And I can, you know, we did something really unique at Lululemon that I would strongly advocate to any organization. When we opened our Columbus DC, that was a greenfield site. So we bought a new building, gutted it and started over. And we seeded that operation with 12 people from one of our other DCs on the West Coast. And we took this really interesting approach where we said, okay, we're going to bring in, you know, technical folks, and we brought in some contractors to do the development work on getting WM ready. But we want to perform the regression testing ourselves. And my first job at Lululemon was to train a team of 12 people, everyone from like hourly associates, team leads, managers, and senior managers who were kind of the foundation of that site. Yeah. I taught them how to do regression testing, how to create test data and execute it in the system and run through test scripts and test scenarios. And we really built kind of an in-house center of excellence at that site. Yeah. And so as we got ready to launch the building, you had all these operators out on the floor who not only knew their business and knew the operation in an intimate way, but they knew how to operate in the system in an intimate way. And because of that, first of all, it made the startup of the site incredibly more successful than it would have been otherwise, as you can imagine. Yeah, I bet. But then that knowledge just lives on within the operation. And because you've got operators involved in the process, you know, they're asking questions like, this transaction doesn't feel right. Can we make this a little bit easier? This menu is counterintuitive. Can we change the way it's laid out? And oftentimes those are really simple, like subtle fixes along the way, but they really increase the ability for a frontline worker to adopt that process. And having the operations folks be a part of that that design, configuration, and testing is invaluable in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that, you know, because I've been in both scenarios. So I've been in scenarios where, you know, the higher ups thinks they have this great idea, and they don't go to the floor, right? They don't go to the floor to talk to the people and, you know, check to see is it going to work. And they try to implement something and it just totally bombs because, it gets there and then, the worker's like, oh, well, I can't do this now. And you're like, well, why? And then, but then, I've also been in a scenario and, I'm of the same mindset is that, anytime that you're going to make some type of change, talk to the worker first and see, like, does this make sense to you?
Yep.
And then, if you're going to make a change, explain the change to them so they understand why. Because, a lot of times, even you mentioned, the success or failure of your project is somewhat dependent on the end user. And, sometimes maybe just the end user, like, they don't understand why something's changing and they're so used to, what they were doing and they may be resistant to change and they just don't want to, get with the change. So because they don't understand and, that can backfire on you too. So I think what you said, I mean, is it's really, really, really important to understand and listen to your workers because they're ultimately the ones that are doing the work at the end of the day, and they got to live with the process. And a lot of times that's where you get those opportunities to improve from too, because they'll suggest something and say like, why do we do something like this? And you may have no idea. So yeah, really, really good insight there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny when you think about like kind of the project one pager, the executive summary, we've all seen them. The status page of, is it green, yellow, red, are we on budget? Are we on time, et cetera? And there's always this list of like important stakeholders, and there's, the executive sponsor and the business sponsor and the project team, and that voice of the customer, and that customer being the person who actually has to perform the work, almost without fail, is not in that conversation. Yeah. They're certainly not on that one-page document. And it on the one hand, it's hard to say, an important stakeholder is all of our pickers, but maybe we should start saying that. Maybe as an industry, we should start acknowledging in these types of, in certain types of projects, it's appropriate to say that a stakeholder is your workforce, and they should have a seat at the table, at least in some type of advisory role, to say, is this going to work for us? And we need to be doing these types of projects, warehouse improvement projects, with them in mind.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that, I always say and, tell, employees that have worked for me on the warehouse level is, at the end of the day, all these people are doing all these things behind the scenes, yes, but you're the last line of defense before we get to the customer, right? So we got to make sure that you can do what you need to do successfully, and so that the customer is happy. Because if something, everything could go okay, but then if something's wrong in the DC level and it goes out the door incorrectly, well then, what's the point of everything else we did, right? So,
right.
So I mean, it's important. I think you have a really good point there. Is that they should be considered a stakeholder, because essentially they are. So, yeah. All right. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really good point there, and I love the takeaways that you got from there. And I can see we're similar mindsets, I think. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your time at Lululemon that you talked about, because I think you spent about 7 years there, maybe closer to 8. But in those years, there was a lot of high growth for Lululemon, and obviously, Lululemon has become a big brand, big name. Known for I think your message to me was the stretchy black pant business or whatever. Yep. So I'm curious, high growth like that can be, especially on the warehouse distribution level, can be a lot of pressure sometimes, and it can be a stressful time because you're seeing this increase in demand because the company is growing, which is a good thing for the company overall. But sometimes it can be stressful to keep up and try and figure out how do you now change things around to meet this demand. So I'm curious, as an individual yourself, and people that may be working for companies or getting into companies that are going through high growth as well, how do you remain flexible as an individual, and then also, you know, on the operation side, how do you allow yourself to kind of deal with the increased demand and maybe get ahead of it as much as possible, and keep in the mindset that, you know, you can get through this, and, you know, you'll be able to keep up?
Yeah, great question. I know most of I think all your viewers are they're going to hear this, not see it, but I guess for your own entertainment, before I started Lululemon, I didn't have any gray hair. So that's what 7 years of, I've called it a 7-year startup. It certainly does take a toll on you. I can also, you know, and I definitely want to acknowledge that, you know, my 7 years at Lululemon have been easily the most impactful and colorful years of my life. And Lululemon is a really unique, really vibrant organization. And I believe wholeheartedly that if, as an organization, they were not who they were, I would not have lasted 7 years. You know, I've been through startups at organizations where culture is not the priority that it is at an organization like Lululemon, and taking care of people is not as big a priority, and it does burn people out.
Yeah.
You know, I don't feel, even after 4 WMS implementations, moving a building, opening a new building, you know, all the things I've done in 7 years, I don't feel burnt out. And I didn't leave because I felt burnt out. I left because I really could not get past this feeling that it was time to start a new chapter in my life, personally and professionally. And have a ton of admiration for the organization and the people that I've had the opportunity to work with there over the years. I think in terms of, you know, and I say that like recognizing that many of your listeners don't have that luxury. Yeah. And I feel very fortunate to have had it. And I think all I could do is really try and coach someone through how to make the best of whatever situation they're in. And that would be some things that I've learned over the years. Like, you've got to be willing to say no. You know, I think someone early in their career, ambitious, you know, trying to move up through the ranks, you want to get yourself attached to a project, especially a startup, because that is, as you mentioned earlier, you just gain a wealth of experience that, you know, in such a short amount of time. But at the same time, you have to be okay saying no. You have to be really clear with yourself and your partner or other people in your life around expectations and priorities, and when does work end. I think one of the more current challenges from COVID has been that the workday, even more than ever, kind of never ends now. Right. You know, as many of us have transitioned to working remotely, you know, there was a structure to your day. If you are someone who's working remotely, there was a structure to your day when you worked in an office, a routine that you don't have anymore. You know, bookends to your day. You get up, shower, breakfast, commute to work. You know, there's a whole process that you went through that you mentally prepare yourself for the workday. And speak for myself, but I'm sure other people can relate to this experience. You know, there was a period of time where I got out of bed, went straight to work in my pajamas with a cup of coffee, and that whole bookend process, you know, was gone because it didn't need to be there. And so it was just, as someone who wants to work hard, and I, you know, a team, you know, spread across North America, so both time zones, it was just really convenient for me. As soon as I woke up, make coffee, sit down, I could be online working, and then that day kind of never stops. So you've got to put some guardrails in place for yourself. I think it's Jeff Bezos that talks about the idea of work-life harmony. You know, I think the idea of work-life balance is a bit of a myth. Right. I like the idea of work-life harmony. Okay. And what that means for me is I want to make sure that I'm the same person at work that I am outside of work. And,
Interesting.
How do I show up in meetings? How do I make decisions in the workplace? Am I making decisions with my head or with my heart?
Mm-hmm.
And am I doing that the same during the workday and outside of the workday? And if you start to see disparity between the way you're showing up as a person at work and the way you're trying to be showing up as a human being in your personal life, that's probably a sign that you need to reevaluate a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Being willing to kind of take time out of your day for yourself, whether that be Lululemon has a reputation for this kind of stuff, and a lot of it's true, but taking a yoga class in the middle of the day or getting a workout in the middle of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think those things are becoming a little more acceptable in the mainstream than they were 7 or 8 years ago.
Right.
But for many organizations, they're still kind of foreign concepts. But those times, that kind of modern workday is the only way you're really going to survive a startup environment in a healthy way, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I've been through them too, and it's stressful. So you do need to
Mm-hmm.
kind of manage your time and your expectations, like you mentioned, not only, with work, but also with your life as well, and find that harmony. I like what you said there. So really good information and advice, and I love that you've experienced so much, and I think you have a great point there for younger listeners that are maybe starting a career. Like tying yourself to a project can really help you grow, and not only just grow in title, right, and maybe salary as well, which people are interested in, but just grow your knowledge overall of a business and all these different aspects. And I think you're a great testament to that, especially you talked about how you moved to the one company, and from the beginning, you were put on like, okay, you're gonna train all these different teams on how to do that. And I'm sure you learned about almost every facet of the distribution process and flow and the business as well, just by doing that. And that's really, really the key to, I think, being successful in our business, is understanding all the different facets and what goes into it, not just within the four walls, but also some external factors as well that can influence what happens in the four walls. And I think that you need to be flexible, which sounds like you have been, and be open to learning those things. If you say like, oh, I'm just shipper, like that's it, I'm just shipping guy. Yeah. That's it, that's all I care about, shipping. I don't think you're not going to be as successful, because there's all these inputs that go into shipping from the other departments. So so really, really good information from you, and love hearing from your experience as well. Now, you mentioned earlier your mission for DistributionX, your new little company that you started, is providing these short little consultations for distribution companies who are looking to do different things, and these small to medium businesses targeted at. So, if people are interested in your service, what services are you kind of offering exactly? What are you focusing on?
Yeah, I would say, if I were to narrow it down, short engagement advisory services focused specifically on distribution and fulfillment. I tend to shy away from the term supply chain, though that is a term that we use, obviously. I would not describe myself as a supply chain expert. Right. If you need help with overseas sourcing, factory inbound, container overseas transportation, that's not an area that I can really offer a lot of value.
Yeah.
I can definitely acknowledge the fact that my experience has been focused more on the distribution and fulfillment front. But to give a couple examples, I'm working with a really exciting e-com business in San Francisco right now, and they have asked me to basically go on some site tours of their 3PL sites and just be an extra set of eyes for them. They put out an RFP. They started with a new 3PL partner early in the year, and they're looking for someone to say, here's some things you should focus on. Here's some opportunities. I'm doing some analytics work for them on order profile. They've got 2 3PL sites in the U.S. And that's like a 2-week project, start to finish. It's a week of kind of grounding and data analytics and analysis, and it's a week of site visits and package up for them a list of recommendations at the end of that. And that's an example of something that I would love to offer to consumer goods and apparel businesses that have a distribution presence and distribution need, whether it be 3PL or in-source.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, cool. So, yeah, looking forward to hearing about how that kind of grows for you, and also future projects as well, which we will talk about in the future. So how can people get in touch with you, and if they're interested in just connecting with you, or if they're interested in DistributionX, how can people do that?
Yeah, hopefully by the time this airs, my website will be out of the Wix development stage and out there for the world. But the website is distributionx.co.
Okay.
I'm also on LinkedIn, and if folks want to email me to connect for an inquiry, coffee chat, virtual chat, whatever we're allowed to do these days, they can reach me at Nate, Nate, at distributionx.co.
All right, great. And we'll post all those links and information on thenewwarehouse.com as well. So, Nate, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Really, really appreciate hearing your story. Tons of great takeaways and learnings from that experience. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. This was fun, and I hope we could do it again soon.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.